Trayvon's routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Every morning at exactly 7:45, he would walk into Café Luna on 9th Street, order his usual medium black coffee with 1 sugar, and settle into his favorite corner table with his laptop. The familiar hum of conversation, the gentle hiss of the espresso machine, and the soft jazz playing overhead created the perfect background noise for his writing. As a freelance content creator and aspiring novelist, he discovered that the cafe's atmosphere helped him focus in ways that his cramped studio apartment never could. For the past 6 months, this had been his sanctuary, his creative space, his escape from the loneliness that seemed to follow him everywhere else. He'd written countless articles, started and abandoned several short stories, and filled pages with observations about the world around him. But lately, he'd found himself distracted by something he couldn't quite name, a feeling that he was missing something important that was hiding in plain sight. It wasn't until his colleague Jada joined him for coffee one Thursday morning that he began to understand what had been nagging at him. Jada was a photographer with an eye for details that others missed, and she had a habit of pointing out things that were so obvious once she mentioned them that Trayvon wondered how he'd ever overlooked them. "You know," she said, settling into the chair across from him with her oat milk latte, "you have a secret admirer." Trayvon looked up from his laptop, where he'd been struggling with the opening paragraph of an article about sustainable living. "What are you talking about?" Jada nodded toward the window that ran along the front of the cafe. "The guy by the window, dark skin, always wearing those perfectly pressed button-down shirts, sits at the same table every single day. He's been watching you for months." Trayvon followed her gaze and felt his breath catch. There, at a small table positioned perfectly to have a clear view of Trayvon's usual spot, sat a man he'd seen countless times but had never really noticed. How was that possible? The man was striking in a quiet way, with strong features and an air of calm competence that drew the eye. He was indeed wearing a crisp blue button-down shirt, and in front of him were 2 coffee cups, one of which appeared to be untouched. "I've never really paid attention," Trayvon admitted, feeling foolish. How had he missed someone so obviously present in his daily routine? "That's because you disappear into your own world when you write," Jada said with a knowing smile. "But trust me, he notices you. I've been coming here for 3 weeks now, and every single time, he's here before you arrive and stays until after you leave. And look at this." She gestured toward the man's table. 2 cups. Every day, 2 cups. But he only drinks from one. Trayvon studied the stranger more carefully, trying to understand what Jada was seeing that he'd missed. The man was reading a book, something thick and serious-looking, but every few pages, his eyes would drift up and scan the cafe. When his gaze landed on Trayvon, there was a moment of connection so brief and subtle that Trayvon almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. "Maybe he's waiting for someone who never shows up," Trayvon suggested, though even as he said it, he knew it sounded weak. "For 6 months? Every single day?" Jada raised an eyebrow. "Honey, nobody's that optimistic about a date who stands them up daily. How do you know it's been 6 months? Because that's when you started coming here regularly, and Marcus started showing up at the same time." "Marcus?" Trayvon's heart skipped. "You know his name?" "I know lots of things. I also know he works at the marketing firm 3 blocks over. He always orders the same thing, a black coffee and a vanilla latte, and he tips exactly 20% every time." Jada leaned forward conspiratorially. "And I know he asked the barista about your usual order about 2 months ago." This information hit Trayvon like a physical blow. Someone had been paying attention to him, learning his habits, caring about his preferences, and he'd been completely oblivious. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. He wasn't used to being the object of someone's attention, especially not someone as quietly attractive as Marcus appeared to be. "What should I do?" Trayvon asked, surprising himself with the question. He wasn't usually one to seek advice about his non-existent love life. Talk to him, obviously, or keep pretending you don't notice him and see how long this elaborate courtship dance continues. Jada gathered her things, preparing to leave for a photo shoot. "But if it were me, I'd want to know why someone thought I was worth watching for 6 months." After Jada left, Trayvon found it impossible to concentrate on his work. Every few minutes, his eyes would drift toward Marcus's table, trying to catch some clue about what the man was thinking. Marcus seemed completely absorbed in his book, but there was something in his posture, a subtle tension, that suggested he was aware of being observed. When Trayvon's phone buzzed with a text message, he was grateful for the distraction. But when he opened the message from an unknown number, his confusion only deepened. "Your writing means more than you know. Keep going. A friend." Trayvon stared at the message, his mind racing. Who had his number? Who knew about his writing? He looked around the cafe, wondering if someone here had sent it, but everyone seemed absorbed in their own activities. Marcus was still reading, apparently oblivious to everything around him. That evening, Trayvon couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered world was shifting in ways he didn't understand. The anonymous message, Jada's revelation about Marcus, the sense that he'd been living his life with blinders on, it all added up to a growing awareness that he'd been missing crucial information about his own existence. Back in his apartment, he decided to clean out his desk drawer, looking for a phone charger that had gone missing. Instead, he found something that made his blood run cold. Nestled between old receipts and forgotten business cards was a small USB flash drive that he'd never seen before. His hands shook as he inserted it into his laptop, and what he found there changed everything he thought he knew about his life. The drive contained dozens of documents, all of them stories. Short pieces of fiction that read like scenes from his own life, but written with a tenderness and attention to detail that took his breath away. There was a story about a writer who always wore blue on Mondays because it made him feel confident. Trayvon looked down at his Monday blue shirt and felt a chill run down his spine. Another story described a man who stirred his coffee counterclockwise exactly 7 times before taking his first sip, a habit he developed after reading that it helped distribute the sugar more evenly. Trayvon had never told anyone about that quirk, had barely been aware of it himself until he read about it in someone else's words. Story after story captured moments from his life with perfect accuracy. The way he bit his lip when he was concentrating, the fact that he always saved the best bite of his pastry for last, the small smile that crossed his face when he found the perfect word for a sentence. Whoever had written these pieces knew him better than he knew himself. But it was more than just accurate observation. The stories were written with love, with a deep appreciation for the small details that made Trayvon who he was. The author clearly cherished these moments, found beauty in the mundane aspects of Trayvon's daily routine. Reading them was like seeing himself through the eyes of someone who found him completely fascinating. At the bottom of the folder was a document titled "Read Me" that contained a single paragraph. "I know this might seem strange, but I wanted you to know that you're seen. Every day, you sit at that corner table and create worlds with your words, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. You have no idea how your presence has changed my life, how watching you pursue your dreams has inspired me to pursue mine. These stories are my way of saying thank you for being exactly who you are. You don't have to do anything with this information. I just wanted you to know that you matter. More than you know." Trayvon read the note 3 times, his heart pounding harder with each pass. Someone had been watching him, studying him, writing about him with the kind of detailed attention usually reserved for beloved characters in novels. And if Jada was right about Marcus being his mysterious observer, then these stories were a love letter written in fiction. He stayed up until 3 in the morning reading every story on the drive, marveling at the way the author had captured not just his actions but the emotions behind them. There was a story about a writer who always looked sad on rainy days, written with such empathy that Trayvon found himself crying over his own fictional sadness. Another piece described the joy that lit up a man's face when he finally found the right ending for a difficult story, and Trayvon remembered exactly which day that had been, exactly how it had felt to break through his writer's block. The next morning, Trayvon arrived at the cafe earlier than usual, his heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. Marcus was already there, of course, sitting at his usual table with his 2 cups of coffee and his book. But today, Trayvon was seeing him with new eyes. Marcus was more handsome than Trayvon had initially realized, with high cheekbones and expressive dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of unspoken thoughts. His shirt today was a soft green that complemented his skin tone perfectly, and his hands as he turned the pages of his book were elegant and careful. Everything about him suggested someone who paid attention to details, who approached the world with thoughtfulness and intention. When Marcus glanced up and their eyes met, Trayvon didn't look away. Instead, he offered a small smile, a tiny acknowledgement of the connection that had been building between them without his awareness. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected to be seen, and then he smiled back with a warmth that made Trayvon's chest tight with emotion. They didn't speak that day, but something had shifted. Trayvon found himself hyper-aware of Marcus's presence, of the way the other man's attention seemed to follow him even when he was pretending to read. When Trayvon left the cafe, he noticed that Marcus watched him go, and the untouched second cup of coffee remained on the table like a question waiting to be answered. Over the next few days, their silent communication continued to evolve. Marcus would nod when Trayvon arrived, and Trayvon would nod back. When Trayvon seemed frustrated with his writing, struggling to find the right words, he would look up to find Marcus watching him with an expression of gentle concern. When Trayvon finally broke through whatever block he was facing, Marcus would smile as if he shared in the victory. It was a strange courtship, conducted entirely through glances and subtle gestures, but it felt more intimate than any relationship Trayvon had ever had. This man knew him, understood him, had been quietly supporting him for months without asking for anything in return. The stories on the flash drive proved that Marcus saw beauty in Trayvon's most ordinary moments, found meaning in gestures that Trayvon himself barely noticed. The breakthrough came on a particularly difficult Tuesday. Trayvon had been struggling with a commissioned article about local restaurants, a piece that should have been straightforward but somehow felt impossible to write. He'd been staring at his laptop screen for 2 hours, typing and deleting the same paragraph over and over again. When he looked up in frustration, he found Marcus watching him with such obvious sympathy that it broke through all his carefully maintained barriers. Without thinking, Trayvon mouthed the word help, half joking but mostly serious. Marcus's response was immediate. He stood up from his table, walked over to the cafe's pastry case, and returned with a chocolate chip cookie, which he placed on Trayvon's table without a word. It was exactly the kind of cookie Trayvon ordered when he was having a particularly bad writing day, a detail that Marcus couldn't possibly have known unless he'd been paying very close attention indeed. "Thank you," Trayvon said quietly, and Marcus's smile in response was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You looked like you needed it," Marcus replied, his voice soft and warm with a slight accent that suggested southern roots. "I know how you get when the words won't come." The casual intimacy of the statement, the implication that Marcus had been watching him closely enough to recognize his moods, should have been unsettling. Instead, it felt like coming home. "You've been watching me," Trayvon said, not accusingly but with wonder. "I have," Marcus admitted, sitting down in the chair across from Trayvon without invitation. "I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable. Are you the one who's been writing about me?" Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, embarrassment, fear, and finally resignation. "You found the stories. How long?" Trayvon asked. "How long have you been watching me? Writing about me?" 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, Marcus said immediately, then blushed at his own precision. "Not that I'm counting or anything." Despite the surrealness of the situation, Trayvon found himself smiling. "You know what I order, you know my writing habits, you even know that I always save the best bite for last. You've been studying me like I'm your favorite book." "You are," Marcus said simply. "You're the most interesting person I've ever seen. The way you lose yourself in your work, the way you celebrate small victories, the way you care about getting every word exactly right. It's beautiful. You're beautiful." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in its completeness. Trayvon felt exposed and cherished at the same time, seen in a way that no one had ever seen him before. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" Trayvon asked. "Why all the secrecy?" Marcus looked down at his hands, suddenly shy. "Because you're brilliant and talented and completely out of my league. Because I'm just a marketing analyst who writes stories as a hobby, and you're a real writer with real dreams. Because I was afraid that if I tried to talk to you, You'd see how ordinary I am and stop being the extraordinary person I get to watch every day. Marcus. Trayvon waited until the other man looked up at him. I've been coming to this cafe for 6 months, and in all that time, you're the first person who's made me feel like I exist. Do you have any idea how lonely it is to spend your days surrounded by people who don't see you? I see you, Marcus said quietly. I've always seen you. I know, Trayvon replied. That's what makes this so incredible. You wrote dozens of stories about me, and in every single one, you made me sound like someone worth knowing. You are worth knowing. You're worth everything. The sincerity in Marcus's voice broke through the last of Trayvon's defenses. Here was someone who had loved him quietly and completely without asking for anything in return, who had found beauty in his most mundane moments, who had been writing their love story long before Trayvon even knew there was a story to tell. The second cup of coffee, Trayvon said suddenly. Every day, you order 2 cups. Marcus smiled sheepishly. Vanilla latte with oat milk and an extra shot. Your usual order, in case you ever wanted to join me. You've been buying me coffee for 6 months? Hoping, Marcus corrected. I've been hoping for 6 months that you might want to have coffee with me. Trayvon reached across the table and touched Marcus's hand, marveling at how perfectly their fingers fit together. I would love to have coffee with you. I would love to hear about your stories, your dreams, your life. I would love to know the person who's been seeing me all this time. Marcus turned his hand over so their palms were touching, and the simple contact sent electricity through Trayvon's entire body. Really? Really? But I have one condition. Marcus's face grew serious. What's that? Next time you write a story about me, I want to be there when it happens. I want to watch you see me. Understand how you transform ordinary moments into something beautiful. Deal, Marcus said, his smile bright enough to power the entire cafe. But fair warning, I think our story is about to get a lot more interesting. They talked for 3 hours that day, their conversation flowing as easily as if they'd known each other for years instead of having just officially met. Marcus told him about his job at a marketing firm, his passion for creative writing, his dreams of someday publishing a novel. Trayvon shared his struggles as a freelance writer, his hopes for his own book, his fears about whether he was talented enough to make it in such a competitive field. You are, Marcus said with complete certainty. I've been reading your work online, the pieces you've published, the samples on your website. You have a voice that matters, a perspective that the world needs to hear. You've been reading my work? Everything I could find. You write about human connection with such insight, such compassion. Your article about loneliness in the digital age made me cry in my office cubicle. Trayvon felt a flush of pride and embarrassment. That was one of my favorite pieces to write, but it barely got any attention. It got my attention. It made me understand that the person sitting in this cafe every day was someone special, someone whose words could change how people see the world. As the afternoon wore on, other patrons came and went, but Trayvon and Marcus remained locked in conversation, making up for months of silent communication with an intensity that left them both exhilarated and exhausted. When Marcus finally glanced at his watch, it was past 4 o'clock. I should get back to work, he said reluctantly. But can we do this again? Tomorrow? Tomorrow, Trayvon agreed. But Marcus, thank you for seeing me, for writing about me, for making me feel like I matter. Thank you for being worth writing about. That evening, Trayvon called Jada to tell her what had happened. Her reaction was everything he'd hoped for and more. I knew it, she crowed. I could tell from across the cafe that man was completely gone for you. And he's been writing stories about you? That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard. It feels surreal, Trayvon admitted. Like I've been living in one story and suddenly woke up in a completely different one. A better one? Trayvon thought about Marcus's gentle smile, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about writing, the months of patient watching and waiting and hoping. Definitely a better one. The next few weeks were a revelation. Trayvon and Marcus fell into a new routine, one that centered around long conversations over multiple cups of coffee, shared pastries, and the gradual revelation of 2 lives that had been orbiting each other for months without connecting. Marcus was everything Trayvon had hoped and more. He was thoughtful and funny, with a dry sense of humor that caught Trayvon off guard and made him laugh harder than he had in years. He was passionate about social justice issues, volunteering at a local literacy center on weekends and using his marketing skills to help nonprofits spread their message. He was ambitious but not ruthless, dreaming of someday starting his own agency that would focus exclusively on mission-driven organizations. But what impressed Trayvon most was Marcus's genuine interest in other people, his ability to listen with complete attention and find meaning in the smallest details of daily life. The same quality that had led him to write such beautiful stories about Trayvon made him an exceptional conversationalist and an even better friend. "I want to show you something," Marcus said one afternoon after they'd finished discussing Trayvon's latest article assignment. He pulled out his phone and opened a document. "I wrote this last night, after our conversation about your childhood." The story was about a boy who learned to find magic in library books because they were the only place he felt truly safe. A boy who grew up to become a writer because words had saved him when nothing else could. It was Trayvon's story, but told with such tenderness and insight that he barely recognized himself as the protagonist. "You make me sound brave," Trayvon said quietly. "You are brave. Every day, you sit down and try to create something meaningful out of nothing but words and hope. That's the definition of bravery." These moments of recognition, of being truly seen and understood, became the foundation of their growing relationship. Marcus continued to write stories about Trayvon, but now he shared them as they were created, turning his observations into gifts that he offered with shy pride. There was a story about the way Trayvon's face changed when he was editing, becoming focused and intense as he searched for exactly the right word. Another about the ritual of his coffee preparation, the care he took in creating the perfect environment for creativity. Each story was a love letter disguised as fiction, a way of saying, "I see you, I understand you, I treasure you," without the vulnerability of direct declaration. But as their friendship deepened, Trayvon began to want more than understanding. He wanted to touch Marcus's face when he smiled, wanted to kiss him when he said something particularly insightful, wanted to hold him close and whisper all the things that felt too important for casual conversation. The problem was that neither of them seemed willing to take the first step toward something beyond friendship. They were both cautious by nature, both carrying the scars of past relationships that had ended badly, both afraid to risk what they had for the possibility of something more. The breakthrough came during their company's annual retreat, a weekend camping trip in the mountains that was supposed to build team morale and encourage collaboration. Trayvon had dreaded the event, expecting forced activities and awkward team-building exercises. But when he discovered that Marcus's company was also attending the same retreat center, his perspective changed entirely. "Room assignments are posted," announced the retreat coordinator on Friday afternoon as the buses arrived at the camp. "You'll be bunking with someone from the other company to encourage cross-collaboration." Trayvon approached the list with trepidation, scanning for his name and hoping he wouldn't be paired with someone completely incompatible. When he found it, his heart nearly stopped. Trayvon Williams, Cabin 7, Marcus Johnson. He looked around for Marcus and found him standing nearby, staring at his own copy of the list with an expression of surprise and something that looked like panic. "Looks like we're roommates," Trayvon said, approaching with what he hoped was casual confidence. "Looks like it," Marcus replied, but his voice was tight with something Trayvon couldn't identify. "Is that a problem?" Marcus met his eyes for a moment, and Trayvon saw a flash of longing so intense it took his breath away. "No," Marcus said quietly. "It's not a problem." Cabin 7 was rustic but comfortable, with 2 single beds separated by a small table and a window that looked out over the lake. As they unpacked their bags, the air between them hummed with unspoken tension, the weight of months of careful friendship suddenly feeling inadequate for the intimacy of shared sleeping space. "I can ask for a different room if this is weird," Trayvon offered, watching Marcus fold his clothes with nervous precision. "It's not weird," Marcus said quickly, then paused. "Well, it is weird, but not bad weird. Just different." That evening, after dinner and the mandatory campfire activities, they found themselves sitting on the small dock that extended into the lake, their feet dangling in the cool water. The stars were brilliant in the unpolluted sky, more numerous than either of them had ever seen in the city. "This is beautiful," Trayvon said, leaning back on his hands and looking up at the Milky Way. "It is," Marcus agreed. But when Trayvon glanced over, he found Marcus looking at him instead of the sky. "Marcus." "I know," Marcus said quickly. "I know I'm staring. I know it's probably making you uncomfortable. He stopped, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Just what?" "I can't stop looking at you. I've been trying to be cool, trying to be the friend you need instead of the person who's been secretly in love with you for 6 months. But being this close to you, sharing a room with you, it's making it really hard to pretend I don't want more." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable, and exactly what Trayvon had been hoping to hear for weeks. "Marcus," he said softly, turning to face him fully. "Look at me." Marcus raised his eyes reluctantly, as if expecting to see rejection or discomfort. Instead, he saw warmth and affection and the kind of careful hope that comes with wanting something desperately but being afraid to reach for it. "You don't have to pretend around me," Trayvon said. "You never have to pretend around me. Do you think I've been spending every day at that cafe just for the coffee? I thought—" Marcus started, then stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between reading your stories and learning to see myself through your eyes, I fell completely in love with you. I'm saying that I've been waiting for you to make a move because I was too scared to risk our friendship. I'm saying that if you want more, I want more too." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was real or just another story he was telling himself. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and touched Trayvon's face, his fingers tracing the line of his cheekbone with reverent gentleness. "I want more," he whispered. "I want everything." "Then take it," Trayvon replied, leaning into the touch. "Take everything." Their first kiss was soft and tentative, a question asked and answered with lips and breath and the trembling of hands that finally had permission to touch. Marcus kissed like he wrote, with careful attention to every detail, every response, every small sound that escaped from Trayvon's throat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus pressed his forehead against Trayvon's. "I've been imagining this for so long," he whispered. "How does the reality compare?" "Better," Marcus said with certainty. "So much better." They kissed again, deeper this time, months of careful friendship and patient longing pouring out in the connection of mouth and tongue and the desperate clutching of hands that couldn't bear to let go. When they finally returned to their cabin, they were both shaking with want and the overwhelming relief of finally being able to express what they'd been feeling for so long. That night, they lay in their separate beds and talked until dawn, sharing secrets and dreams and fears they'd never told anyone else. Marcus told Trayvon about his childhood in Georgia, about being the only black kid in his advanced classes, about the pressure he felt to be perfect all the time. Trayvon shared his struggles with anxiety and self-doubt, his fear that he wasn't talented enough to succeed as a writer, his loneliness before Marcus had started seeing him at the cafe. "You saved me," Trayvon said as the sun began to rise over the lake. "I didn't even realize how invisible I felt until you started seeing me." "You saved me too," Marcus replied. "Watching you pursue your dreams gave me permission to pursue mine. Your courage made me brave." When they returned to the city, everything was different. They were no longer two people carefully orbiting each other, but a couple openly in love and committed to building a life together. Marcus moved out of his sterile downtown apartment and into Trayvon's cluttered but cozy place in a diverse neighborhood full of artists and writers. The transition was surprisingly smooth, as if they'd been preparing for this merger for months without realizing it. Marcus's organizational skills complemented Trayvon's creative chaos perfectly. Trayvon's emotional openness helped Marcus express feelings he'd been bottling up for years. They balanced each other, challenged each other, supported each other's dreams with the kind of partnership that made both of them better than they'd been alone. Marcus continued to write stories about Trayvon, but now they were collaborative efforts, with Trayvon reading over his shoulder and adding details or corrections or simply marveling at the way Marcus could transform their ordinary moments into something magical on the page. "You know," Trayvon said one morning as they sat at their usual table in Café Luna, now sharing the same side of the booth and making no effort to hide their relationship. I think I want to write our story. The real story, from the beginning. You mean the 6 months of me stalking you from across the cafe? Marcus asked with a grin. I mean the 6 months of you falling in love with me so completely that you couldn't help but write about it. The months of you buying me coffee every day just in case I wanted to join you. The way you saw beauty in my most ordinary moments and turned them into art. Marcus blushed, still not entirely comfortable with praise for what he considered his hopeless romantic obsession. It sounds less creepy when you put it like that. It was never creepy, Trayvon assured him. It was the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me. You loved me before you knew me, and then you took the time to really know me, and you loved me even more. I did, Marcus agreed softly. I do. Trayvon spent the next 2 weeks crafting their love story, turning Marcus's patient watching and silent devotion into a narrative about the power of seeing and being seen. He wrote about loneliness and connection, about the courage it takes to love someone from a distance, about the magic that happens when two people finally find each other after months of almost missing each other. When he finished, he submitted it to a literary magazine that specialized in contemporary romance. 3 weeks later, he received an acceptance email that made him cry with joy and relief. They want to publish it, he told Marcus, waving his phone excitedly. They want to publish our story. Really? Marcus grabbed the phone and read the email over twice, his smile growing brighter with each pass. They want to publish our story. Our story, Trayvon confirmed, pulling Marcus into a kiss that tasted like celebration and promise, and the kind of happiness that comes from being completely understood by another person. The story was published 3 months later in the magazine's annual love issue, and within days it had been shared thousands of times across social media. Readers connected with the quiet romance, the idea that love could grow in silence and patience, that someone could fall in love with the small details of another person's daily routine. Look at this, Marcus said, scrolling through the comments on the magazine's website. People are sharing their own stories about falling in love with strangers, about watching someone from afar, about the courage it takes to finally make contact. We started something? Trayvon marveled, reading over his shoulder. Our story is inspiring other people to tell theirs. The success of the piece led to other opportunities. Trayvon was invited to read at literary events, to write about relationships and connection for larger publications, to expand the story into a full-length memoir about love and creativity and the importance of being seen. Marcus, emboldened by the positive response to Trayvon's portrayal of their relationship, began submitting his own stories to literary journals. His quiet, observational style found an audience among readers who appreciated nuanced portraits of contemporary life and love. A year after their first official conversation, they were both thriving creatively and personally. They'd developed a routine that honored both their individual needs and their commitment to each other. Mornings were for separate creative work, Trayvon at his laptop, Marcus with his notebook and fountain pen. Afternoons were for collaboration, sharing what they'd written, offering feedback and encouragement, celebrating small victories together. Evenings were for each other, for long conversations over dinner, for reading to each other from books they loved, for the simple pleasure of existing in the same space without needing to perform or achieve anything beyond the contentment of being together. I have something for you, Trayvon said one evening as they sat on the small balcony of their apartment, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and orange. What's the occasion? Marcus asked, accepting the small wrapped package with curiosity.
No e cachen.
I just saw it and thought of you. Marcus unwrapped the gift to reveal a leather-bound journal, expensive and beautiful, with his initials embossed on the cover. Trayvon, this is gorgeous. Open it. Marcus opened to the first page and found Trayvon's handwriting. For Marcus, who taught me that love is found in the details. Thank you for seeing me before I knew I wanted to be seen. Thank you for writing our story before I knew we had one. Thank you for being exactly who you are. All my love, T. There's more, Trayvon said softly. Marcus turned the page and found another message, this one more formal. Marcus Johnson, Will you be my co-author in this story we're writing together? Will you help me turn our love into words that might help other people believe in the possibility of finding each other? Marcus looked up from the journal, his eyes bright with tears and joy. Are you asking me to collaborate on a book? I'm asking you to collaborate on everything, Trayvon replied. Our story, our lives, our dreams. I'm asking you to be my partner in every sense of the word. Yes, Marcus said without hesitation. Yes to all of it. Yes to everything. They sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like the future, like the next chapter of a story that had begun with silent observation and patient love, and had grown into something neither of them could have imagined when they were just two strangers sharing the same cafe. Later that night, as they lay in bed planning their collaborative projects and dreaming about the stories they would tell together, Marcus said quietly, I want to write the kissing scenes. Trayvon laughed, the sound warm and rich in the darkness. Just the kissing scenes? Okay, maybe some of the other romantic parts too, but definitely the kissing scenes. I've been imagining them for over a year now. I think I've got some good material to work with. I love you, Trayvon said, pulling Marcus closer. I love your stories. I love your imagination. I love the way you see beauty in everything. I love you too, Marcus replied. Thank you for letting me see you. Thank you for seeing me back. Outside their window, the city hummed with the stories of millions of people, each one searching for connection, for understanding, for someone who would see them clearly and love them completely. But inside their apartment, Trayvon and Marcus had found exactly what they'd been looking for, and they were ready to spend the rest of their lives writing about it together. Their love story had begun in silence, with one man watching another and finding poetry in the mundane moments of daily life. It had grown through patience and hope and the courage to finally speak the truth about desire and devotion. And now it would continue through collaboration and shared dreams and the kind of partnership that turns two individual stories into one beautiful narrative about the power of being truly seen by another person. In the end, Marcus had been right about one thing. Their story had gotten much more interesting once they started writing it together. And they were just getting started. 6 months later, their collaborative book proposal was accepted by a mid-sized publisher who specialized in contemporary memoirs and literary nonfiction. The editor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Chun, had been moved by their sample chapters and saw potential for a broader conversation about modern love and digital-age romance. What I love about your story, she told them during their first meeting in the publisher's Manhattan office, is how it challenges the narrative that online dating and social media have made romance less meaningful. You've shown that love can still be patient, still be observational, still be built on truly seeing another person. Trayvon and Marcus exchanged glances across the conference table, still sometimes surprised when other people understood what they'd found in each other. The market is saturated with hookup culture and instant gratification, Sarah continued, flipping through their proposal. But you're offering something different. A story about the beauty of slow love, of falling for someone's daily rituals and quiet moments. It's refreshing. The book deal came with a modest advance and a timeline that would require them to write intensively for the next 8 months. They approached the project with the same collaborative spirit they'd brought to their shorter pieces, but the sustained effort of crafting a full-length narrative revealed new depths to their creative partnership. Marcus turned out to have a gift for structure and pacing, while Trayvon excelled at emotional depth and character development. They divided chapters based on their strengths, but every piece was edited and refined by both of them until their individual voices blended into something cohesive and powerful. Read this part, Marcus would say, pointing to a section he'd written about his childhood in Georgia. Does it sound like me or like you trying to sound like me? It sounds like us, Trayvon would reply after reading carefully. It sounds like the voice we've created together. This process of blending their perspectives extended beyond their writing life into their daily routines. They'd moved to a larger apartment with separate office spaces, but they often found themselves gravitating toward each other's workspace, sharing ideas and offering feedback even when they were supposedly working on individual projects. Trayvon's freelance career had evolved to include more personal essay work and relationship columns for online publications. His writing had gained depth and nuance from his relationship with Marcus, and readers responded to the authenticity in his voice. He no longer wrote from a place of loneliness and longing, but from the security of being truly known by another person. Marcus had begun placing his observational stories in literary magazines, and several had been nominated for small press awards. His writing style had grown more confident, influenced by Trayvon's emotional openness and willingness to be vulnerable on the page. "You've made me braver," Marcus told him one evening as they worked side by side in their shared living room, laptops balanced on their knees, a pot of tea cooling on the coffee table between them. "How so?" "I used to write about people from a distance like I was documenting specimens. But you've taught me that the most interesting stories come from getting close, from being willing to let the subject matter change you." Trayvon looked up from his screen, studying Marcus's profile in the lamplight. Even after more than a year together, he sometimes felt overwhelmed by the privilege of being loved by someone so thoughtful and articulate. "You've made me more observant," he replied. "Before you, I was so focused on my own internal experience that I missed most of what was happening around me. Now I see everything differently, the way strangers interact, the small kindnesses people show each other, the stories that are happening in plain sight." Their book, tentatively titled The Watcher and the Watched, a love story in real time, was scheduled for publication the following spring. As they worked toward their deadline, they began to understand that they were creating more than just a memoir. They were crafting a manifesto about the importance of attention, patience, and the courage to love someone fully. The winter of their intensive writing period was marked by a series of small but significant milestones. Marcus sold his first short story to a prestigious literary journal. Trayvon was invited to speak at a conference about digital age relationships. They celebrated each other's successes with the kind of generous joy that comes from being genuinely invested in a partner's happiness. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the adoption of a small orange tabby cat they found shivering outside their building during a February snowstorm. They'd named him Patches after the irregular orange and white markings that covered his tiny body, and he'd quickly become the third member of their family. "He likes to sleep on your chest while you write," Trayvon observed one morning, finding Marcus at his desk with the cat draped across his torso like a furry, purring blanket. "He's my writing companion," Marcus said, gently stroking Patches' head. "I think he can sense when I'm struggling with a sentence. He starts purring harder until I figure it out." Emotional support cat for writers. We should put that in the book. Already did. Chapter 12, the section about creating sacred writing space. This kind of seamless integration of their daily lives into their creative work had become natural for them. They were living the story they were telling, and telling the story they were living in a way that felt both intentional and organic. As spring approached and their manuscript neared completion, they began to think about what would come next. The book was just the beginning of what they hoped would be a long career of collaborative storytelling, but they also wanted to make sure their relationship could thrive beyond the shared project that had initially brought them together as partners. "What if we hate each other by the time this is published?" Trayvon asked one evening, only half joking, as they reviewed page proofs that had arrived from their editor. "Then we'll write a really interesting sequel," Marcus replied without missing a beat. "The love story that ended in literary warfare." "I'm serious, though. What if working together this intensively changes how we feel about each other?" Marcus set down his red pen and looked at Trayvon directly. "Do you feel differently about me now than you did 8 months ago?" Trayvon considered the question honestly. "I love you differently. More deeply, I think. I understand you better, appreciate you more. Working together has shown me parts of you I never would have discovered otherwise." "Then I think we're okay," Marcus said gently. "Love that deepens under pressure is the kind of love that lasts." The book was published in May to generally positive reviews and modest but steady sales. Their local bookstore hosted a launch party that drew friends, family, and strangers who had been moved by their story. Trayvon's parents flew in from Chicago, and Marcus's mother drove up from Atlanta, both families having embraced their relationship with warmth and enthusiasm. "I'm proud of you both," Marcus's mother told them at the party, her arms around both men as they posed for photos. "You've created something beautiful together, and it shows in everything you do." The success of the book led to speaking engagements at libraries, bookstores, and writers' conferences. They discovered that they were naturally gifted public speakers, with Marcus's calm presence balancing Trayvon's more animated storytelling style. Audiences responded to their obvious affection for each other and their willingness to be vulnerable about the challenges and rewards of creative collaboration. The question we get asked most often, Trayvon told the audience at a literary festival that summer, is whether it's difficult to maintain boundaries between our personal and professional relationship. The answer is that we don't try to maintain those boundaries. Our love is what makes our work possible, and our work is what keeps our love growing. But we do have rules, Marcus added, getting a laugh from the crowd. No editing each other's work after 10 p.m., no discussing plot problems during romantic dinners, and absolutely no using relationship conflicts as material for our writing without explicit consent from both parties. That last one is really important, Trayvon agreed. Trust is the foundation of both love and collaborative creativity. Without it, you have neither. These conversations with audiences helped them articulate what they'd learned about partnership, both romantic and creative. They began to understand that their story resonated with people not just because it was about love, but because it was about the courage to be vulnerable, to be seen, to allow another person's perspective to change how you see yourself. Fall brought new opportunities and new challenges. A television production company expressed interest in optioning their story for a limited series, an opportunity that was both exciting and terrifying. They met with producers and screenwriters, trying to protect the essential elements of their story while remaining open to the possibilities that adaptation could bring. What's important to us, Marcus explained to the showrunner during their first pitch meeting, is that the story remains about the quiet moments, the small gestures, the way love can grow in silence and patience. We don't want it to become a romantic comedy with manufactured drama and unrealistic obstacles. What we have is already dramatic, Trayvon added. The drama of being lonely, of learning to trust, of finding the courage to love someone completely. We don't need car chases or evil exes or artificial conflict. The producers seemed to understand their vision, and negotiations began for a deal that would give them significant creative control over the adaptation. It was a surreal experience, sitting in Hollywood conference rooms and discussing their private love story as intellectual property, but they approached it with the same collaborative spirit they brought to everything else. Winter brought a different kind of milestone when Marcus proposed during a quiet evening at home. There was no elaborate plan, no public spectacle, just the two of them and Patches and the natural progression of a love that had been growing steadily for nearly 2 years. "I want to marry you," Marcus said, looking up from the manuscript he'd been editing. "Not because I think we need to make some kind of public declaration, but because I want to promise you that I'll keep seeing you, really seeing you, for the rest of our lives." "Yes," Trayvon replied without hesitation. "Yes, obviously yes." They were married the following spring in a small ceremony at the Botanical Garden where they'd had their first official date outside of the cafe. The guest list was limited to family and close friends, and the ceremony was officiated by Marcus's childhood minister, who had driven up from Georgia specifically for the occasion. "Love is an act of attention," the minister said in his homily, quoting from their book. "These two men have shown us what it means to truly see another person, to find beauty in daily routines, to build intimacy through careful observation and patient understanding. They have created a love story that inspires others to believe in the possibility of being fully known and fully accepted." Their second book, Attention, Essays on Love and Observation, was published 2 years later and received even better reviews than their first. It was a collection of jointly written pieces about the art of seeing, ranging from profiles of couples who had been together for decades to meditations on the way technology shapes modern relationships. The book won a small literary award and was selected for several book clubs, leading to a touring schedule that took them across the country. They appeared on podcasts and radio shows, always emphasizing the importance of slowing down, paying attention, finding meaning in small moments. "We live in a culture of distraction," Trayvon told an interviewer in Portland. "Everyone is looking at their phones, rushing to the next thing, treating people as interruptions rather than connections. But love requires presence. It requires the willingness to be bored together, to notice the small changes in your partner's face, to find meaning in routine. The stories we tell about love are often about grand gestures and dramatic moments, Marcus added. But real love is built in the quiet spaces between those moments. It's built in the decision to pay attention when attention feels unnecessary, to choose curiosity over judgment, to see your partner clearly even when they're not at their best. These interviews and appearances helped them refine their thinking about love and attention, but they also made them more conscious of the privilege they had in being able to love openly and publicly. They began donating a portion of their book proceeds to organizations that supported LGBTQ+ youth and couples who didn't have the same freedom to express their love without fear. Their third book was a departure from memoir and essay, a novel about two men who fall in love through a series of mistaken identity scenarios involving online dating profiles. It was lighter in tone than their previous work but maintained their focus on the importance of seeing and being seen accurately. Fiction gives us permission to explore the what-ifs, Marcus explained to their editor during the planning stages. What if Trayvon had been too scared to respond to my stories? What if I had never found the courage to leave that flash drive? What if we had both been different people with different obstacles? The novel was well received and sold better than either of their non-fiction books, leading to discussions about a series and potential film adaptation. But success, they discovered, brought its own challenges. They found themselves busier than ever, with less time for the quiet moments that had originally drawn them together. We need to be careful, Trayvon said one evening as they compared their respective calendars, trying to find time for a proper date night. We can't let the business of writing about love interfere with actually loving each other. Agreed, Marcus replied. I propose we implement a moratorium on relationship-related professional activities 1 day a week. Sundays are for us, not for our brand. Our brand. You know what I mean. The public version of our relationship, the marketable story we tell about ourselves. Sundays are for the private version, the one that doesn't have to be inspiring or educational or useful to anyone but us. This boundary setting became increasingly important as their public profile grew. They were interviewed for documentaries about modern love, invited to speak at conferences about creativity and collaboration, asked to endorse products and services that claim to help people find meaningful relationships. It's weird, isn't it? Trayvon mused as they walked through their neighborhood on one of their protected Sunday afternoons. We've become the couple that other people look to for relationship advice, but we're still figuring it out ourselves. Maybe that's why people trust us, Marcus suggested. We're not pretending to have all the answers. We're just sharing what we've learned and hoping it helps someone else feel less alone. Their fourth book, published 5 years after their first, was a return to memoir but with a broader scope. The Long View, 5 years of learning to love, examined how their relationship had evolved, the challenges they'd faced, the ways they'd grown both individually and as a partnership. It was their most vulnerable work yet, including honest discussions about arguments they'd had, moments when they'd questioned their compatibility, the difficulties of maintaining intimacy while building a public career around their private relationship. We almost broke up during the writing of our second book, Trayvon revealed in a chapter about creative differences. We had completely different visions for a particular essay, and neither of us was willing to compromise. We spent 2 weeks barely talking to each other, both convinced that the other person was being unreasonable. What saved us, Marcus continued in the next section, was remembering that our relationship was more important than being right. We had to choose between winning an argument and keeping our partnership, and fortunately we chose the partnership. This level of honesty resonated with readers who were tired of perfected, sanitized relationship advice. The book became their biggest success, spending several weeks on bestseller lists and earning them invitations to speak at major conferences and universities. But success also brought scrutiny. They found themselves the subject of gossip blogs and social media speculation, with strangers analyzing their public appearances for signs of relationship trouble. The pressure to present a perfect partnership became overwhelming at times. I miss when we were just two people who loved each other, Marcus said one evening after a particularly invasive interview where the journalist had pressed them about their sex life and future family plans. We still are, Trayvon reminded him. Everything else is just noise. Is it, though? Sometimes I feel like we're performing our relationship instead of living it. This conversation led to a sabbatical year where they declined most public appearances and focused on writing individually rather than collaboratively. Trayvon worked on a novel about a writer struggling with fame, while Marcus began a series of essays about privacy and authenticity in the digital age. The break was refreshing and necessary, reminding them why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Without the pressure to constantly produce content about their relationship, they rediscovered the quiet pleasures of domestic life, cooking together, reading to each other, taking long walks without documenting them for social media. "I want to start saying no to things," Trayvon announced one morning over breakfast. "No to interviews that ask us to perform our love story. No to speaking engagements that treat us like relationship experts. No to opportunities that require us to be publicly romantic on command." "Yes," Marcus agreed immediately. "I want to protect what we have. The real thing, not the public version." They spent the next year rebuilding their boundaries and reconnecting with the aspects of their relationship that had nothing to do with their career. They traveled without writing about it, had arguments without turning them into content, celebrated anniversaries without posting about them online. When they returned to public life, it was with a clearer sense of what they were willing to share and what they wanted to keep private. Their fifth book, Boundaries, Protecting Love in Public, was their most mature work yet, exploring the challenges that came with success and the importance of maintaining authenticity in an increasingly connected world. "Love is not a performance," Trayvon wrote in the book's introduction. "It's not content to be consumed or a product to be marketed. It's a private miracle that happens between two people who choose to see each other clearly, day after day, regardless of who's watching." The book was well received but sold modestly compared to their previous works, which they took as a sign that they were successfully prioritizing authenticity over marketability. They were proud of the work and the boundaries it represented, even if it meant smaller audiences and fewer opportunities. Their relationship continued to evolve and deepen, marked by small rituals and private jokes that belonged only to them. They still met at Café Luna most mornings, though now they sat together at a table for two and shared one newspaper instead of pretending not to notice each other. "Do you ever miss it?" Marcus asked one morning, nodding toward the corner table where Trayvon used to sit alone. "The mystery, the uncertainty, the slow build of possibility?" "Never," Trayvon replied without hesitation. "I love knowing you. I love being known by you. I love the certainty of waking up next to you every morning and falling asleep next to you every night. Even when I hog the covers? Especially when you hog the covers. It means you're there." 10 years after their first conversation, they were still discovering new depths to their love and their creative partnership. They had published 6 books together, survived the pressures of public attention, and built a life that honored both their individual dreams and their shared vision. Their latest project was their most ambitious yet, a comprehensive guide to collaborative creativity that drew from their experience as writing partners but expanded to include interviews with other creative couples, research on partnership dynamics, and practical exercises for readers interested in working with their romantic partners. "We're not just writing about love anymore," Marcus observed as they reviewed the manuscript. "We're writing about how love can be a creative force, how two people can make something together that neither could create alone. It feels like the natural evolution of everything we've been exploring," Trayvon agreed. "We started with the story of how we found each other, then moved into what we learned about sustaining love, and now we're sharing what we've discovered about making love productive and creative." The book, tentatively titled Creating Together, A Guide to Collaborative Love, was scheduled for publication the following year. They were excited about the project but also aware that it might be their last book as a duo. They were both increasingly interested in pursuing individual projects while maintaining their personal partnership. "Whatever happens with our writing careers," Marcus said one evening as they walked through the park where they'd had their first official date, "I want you to know that falling in love with you was the best story I've ever been part of. Even better than the one where you stalked me for 6 months before finding the courage to talk to me," Trayvon teased. "Especially that one," Marcus replied, pulling Trayvon close for a kiss. "That's the story that made all the others possible." As they headed home together, walking the familiar streets of the neighborhood they'd chosen together, past the cafe where their love story had begun, They were both thinking about the future. There would be more books, more opportunities, more challenges to navigate. But there would also be more quiet mornings, more shared meals, more moments of perfect understanding between two people who had learned to see each other completely. Their love story had begun with one man watching another and finding poetry in ordinary moments. It had grown through patience and courage and the willingness to be vulnerable. And it continued through the daily choice to keep seeing each other, to keep creating together, to keep writing their story one day at a time. In the end, they had discovered that the most beautiful love stories weren't the ones that ended with happily ever after, but the ones that continued, page after page, year after year, with two people committed to writing each new chapter together.